Hey everyone, Pastor Tim here, Community of Grace Lutheran Church, and it is Christmas weekend. Can you believe it? And children all over the world can hardly wait because Santa Claus is coming to town. Now for some of you, this may seem kind of weird for a pastor to confess, but I'm a huge Santa fan. I love Santa. I love the joy that he brings to the hearts of children and adults all around the world. I love his generous spirit. I love the energy that he brings to Christmas. I love everything about Santa. Over the last 40 years or so, I've had a chance to actually play Santa, or a version of Santa, and it would be during maybe some Christmas Sunday school programs or a Christmas banquet, or as this picture shows you, during our Christmas concerts here at Grace. And over the last many years, I've been collecting Santas. When Jan and I travel around the world or to different countries, we find a Santa that represents that country or that state. And they're out all year long because I love Santa. But what I love most about Santa is his story and the way that his story connects to the story of Jesus. The story of Santa begins over 1,800 years ago, a couple hundred years after the birth of Jesus, in a small town called Peoria, which is now in modern-day Turkey. And that's where Nicholas was born, to two parents who were believers in Jesus. And like children of that day, he was baptized into the Christian faith, and he was raised in his church house where they would have their worship services. So it was probably a small church in a home, and it could very well have been that church was started by the Apostle Paul a couple hundred years earlier. So Nicholas grew up an advocate for Jesus, a follower of Jesus, which was no easy task in those days because it could cost you your life. At that point in time, Christianity was seen with skepticism by the Roman Empire. And so sometimes when the Roman Empire would get itself into trouble, it would start to persecute Christians to draw attention away from the stuff the Roman Empire shouldn't be doing. And yet Nicholas kept the faith. Well, when he was 18 years old, his parents died, probably from one of those plagues that would move its way through the Roman Empire. And they left him with a large amount of money. He was very, very rich after their death. And as a follower of Jesus, he wondered what he should do with all of that money. And so he decided that he would model Jesus, and he would be known for generosity. So a lot of stories have grown up around Nicholas and his generosity over the centuries, and the most famous of them, and we're not sure how true it is, what aspects are true, but the most famous is about a family that lived down the street from him in Peoria. This family had 3 daughters, but they were poor. And in those days, in order for a daughter to be married, the family had to pay a dowry, a sum of money, to the groom's family. Well, they had no money, which meant the dad was going to have to sell his daughters into servitude. So Nicholas one night snuck over, and he threw a bag of money through an open window, and it landed in a stocking hanging out by the fireplace to dry. And when the daughter put her foot in the stocking the next morning, she found that bag of money, and for them it was a miracle, and she was able to get married. A few months later, he did the same thing for the second daughter, and then for the third. But the third time around, Dad was waiting, and he caught Nicholas in the act of giving. So Nicholas begged him not to say anything, and the father kept his mouth shut for a long time, but eventually it came out that Nicholas was the person behind all of these generous acts. And it wasn't long before Nicholas was seen as one of the leaders of the Christian church. Well, in 295, the Bishop of Myra died. This was a neighboring town to Peoria, and so they were looking for a new bishop. Now, at that time, the Christian church was under persecution, and bishops and pastors in particular were being imprisoned, beaten, and some of them were killed. And it's in that climate that the people of Myra called Nicholas to be their new bishop. And he said yes. And immediately he was thrown into prison, beaten for his faith. And his neighboring bishop from his hometown of Peoria, he was killed during that time. Well, in 313, the Emperor Constantine became a Christian, and Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. And there were some rumors that one of the reasons why Constantine became a Christian was because he had visions of Nicholas inviting him to follow Jesus. In 325, Constantine brought a group of leaders together, Christian leaders, to help them sort of come to terms with what they believed and didn't believe about Jesus. And Nicholas played an important role in all of those discussions. So Nicholas, his fame began to grow. And as time went on, stories were told about him, about his generosity. Soon, miraculous stories were told about him. And people began to celebrate his life because he was known for his passion for the faith, for his generosity, for his acts of justice. And so they began to celebrate his life on December the 6th, which they called St. Nicholas Feast Day. And that was a day when people would exchange gifts in memory of St. Nicholas. And soon that tradition began to spread, as did St. Nicholas and his name. But of course, his name would change depending on the language. And so the Dutch, for example, referred to him not as St. Nicholas, but as Sinterklaas. And they had the tradition of St. Nicholas Feast Day. They would give gifts on that day, and they brought that tradition with them to the New World when they founded New Amsterdam. In 1664, the English conquered the Dutch, changed the name New Amsterdam to New York. But one of the things that the English kept from the Dutch was St. Nicholas Feast Day on December the 6th. But they changed the name Sinterklaas to Santa Claus. In 1822, we got our first word picture of Santa Claus in a poem called "'Twas the Night Before Christmas, a Visit from St. Nicholas." And this was a poem that was inspired by a poem that Washington Irving had written earlier about Santa. And it was Washington Irving, by the way, who was the first to tell us that Santa would touch the side of his nose. And it was in this poem by Clement Moore where we first learned that Santa was a jolly, plump old man who rode a reindeer-driven sleigh from house to house. Then in the 1860s, we sort of had our first real pictures of Santa, thanks to Thomas Nast, who was a political cartoonist. And he would draw pictures of Santa Claus. And because at that time, the big story every year was the race to the North Pole, it was Thomas Nast who told us that Santa had his village up in the North Pole. But perhaps the most iconic picture that we have of Santa today comes to us courtesy of Coca-Cola. Back in the early 1900s, Coca-Cola was being protested against by the Christian Temperance Union. And so Coca-Cola needed to change its image. They wanted to get younger consumers of Coca-Cola, and they wanted to do something special for Christmas. So they hired an artist by the name of Haddon Sundblom, and he came up with this picture that you see today, picture of Santa, which has become the defining picture of Santa Claus almost all around the world. And now 1,800 years later, St. Nicholas, or Santa Claus, is celebrated all around the world on the internet, TV shows, movies, songs, malls, and the hearts and souls and imaginations of children and adults. And he's still known by various names: Santa Claus, Sinterklaas, St. Nicholas. He's known as Father Frost, as Father Christmas, Père Noël. But it's all Santa Claus. And it all comes down to a story about a follower of Jesus 1,800 years ago who was known for his generosity. Now, Santa is an iconic figure of the Christmas season, and because he and Jesus share the spotlight in some ways at this time of year, sometimes it's easy for us to sort of enmesh the two stories. And sometimes we begin to see Jesus as a souped-up version of Santa. And so it's good for us occasionally to step back and look at these two stories and compare them and contrast them so that we can see the different roles that they play in the Christmas story. So, for example, one of the things that we know about Santa Claus is his gifts are temporary. They don't last. So Santa might bring you this year something to eat, and you'll eat it, it'll be gone. Or maybe he'll bring you some clothes that you'll wear for a while and they'll go out of fashion or you'll outgrow them. Maybe he'll bring you some toys and you'll play with the toys for a while. Maybe they'll break or you'll outgrow them. The gifts are temporary. And that's why Santa has to come back every single year. He's got to bring you new gifts because the gifts from last year don't last anymore. The gifts that Jesus gives are eternal. And the gifts that Jesus gives to us last not only in this life, but on to eternity, and they're the gifts that we need. The gifts that we need every single day. Grace, love, forgiveness, hope, joy. These are the gifts that matter, and those are the gifts that Jesus gives to you right now in this moment. Secondly, we know that Santa's love for us is conditional. There's a story about a little boy who went to the mall to see Santa, had this huge list of things he wanted. And on that list was an Arizona Cardinals football helmet, an Xbox, a VR thingy, a bike, and the list just went on and on. And Santa was impressed. He says, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this list, I'm going to bring it back to the North Pole, and I'm going to check the records to see whether you've been naughty or nice. And the boy grabbed the list back and said, never mind, I'll settle for the Cardinals helmet. You see, Santa's making a list. He's checking it twice. He's going to find out who's naughty or nice. If you're naughty, you might get a lump of coal in that stocking. If you're good, then maybe you'll get some nice gifts. Because Santa's love is based on our behavior. Jesus' love is unconditional. Jesus loves us no matter what. There's nothing we can do to get Jesus to love us more. There's nothing we can do to get Jesus to love us less. He just loves us, period, all the time, end of, because his love for us is unconditional. And then finally, Santa only shows up once a year. He's this jolly old fellow. He jumps in, he brings some joy to our lives, some laughter, some happiness, and then he's gone. So he's not there every single day. He's not there when we need him. He's not there to laugh when we laugh. He's not there to cry when we cry. He's not there to support us when we need a friend. He's just in and out of our lives. But Jesus is God, Emmanuel. He will never leave us nor forsake us. He is the one who will be with you always. And that's a promise you can count on. So the story of Santa is an important story. It's an important Christmas story because his story is rooted in the story of Christmas. He was a generous person because of the generosity of Jesus. So Santa exists because of Christmas, but Christmas exists because of Jesus. And just as Jesus used Santa, St. Nicholas, all those years ago, and his generosity to change the world, Jesus calls you to follow him as well, that he might use you through your acts of generosity to bring joy to the world around you. Merry Christmas.